The Dyatlov Pass Incident. 1959, Soviet Union. A land where the cold is merciless, and human life is nothing more than a flickering candle in the storm. A group of young students, filled with dreams, energy, and the thirst for adventure, set out on a journey into the frozen wilderness. A journey that was supposed to prove their strength, their endurance, their willpower. But instead, it became one of the most chilling unsolved horrors in history. What happened on that mountain was not just a tragedy. It was something unnatural. Some say it was an avalanche. Some whisper about secret military tests. Others believe it was something far darker, something not of this world. This is the story of the Dyatlov Pass Incident. And tonight, we'll step into the snowstorm and relive the nightmare. Snow-capped mountain, the beginning of the expedition. It all started as a normal adventure. Their leader was Igor Dyatlov, just 23 years old, but already an experienced mountaineer. He gathered 9 of his closest friends and fellow students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. They were strong, skilled, and full of life. They carried diaries and cameras to record every moment of the expedition. In the photographs that survived, you see them smiling, laughing, building snow shelters, playing guitars. The images are haunting, because none of them knew that these would be the last smiles they would ever have. On January 28th, one member, Yuri Yudin, fell ill and decided to turn back. He thought his bad luck ruined the trip, but in truth, it saved his life. He would be the last person to see his friends alive. The remaining 9 continued. They had no idea that death was already waiting for them on the icy slope. Snowflake the last night. February 1st, 1959. The Ural Mountains. The group pitched their tent on the side of a slope near Kolotsyakal, a name that, in the language of the local Monty people, means the mountain of the dead. The decision to camp there was unusual. They could have gone further down, into the forest, where the trees would protect them from the wind. But Igor decided to set camp on the open slope, maybe to save time the next morning. It was the decision that sealed their fate. That night, the temperatures dropped to -25 degrees Celsius. The wind howled like an animal, tearing through the mountains. But inside the tent, the hikers cooked dinner, cracked jokes, played music, and wrote in their diaries. And then they went to sleep. But sometime deep in the night, something happened. Something that forced 9 experienced hikers to do the unthinkable. Cut open their own tent from the inside, and run barefoot into the freezing snow. Skull and crossbones, the discovery. When the group never returned, their families raised the alarm. A rescue mission was launched. Weeks later, the first horrifying discovery was made. The rescuers found the tent, half buried in snow. Their boots, coats, and food were still inside, untouched. But the fabric of the tent was slashed open from the inside. Footprints led away from the camp, barefoot footprints, some in only socks, some completely bare. The prints continued into the snow, before disappearing into the storm. Not long after, the first two bodies were found, lying near the edge of the forest beneath a tree. They were almost naked, wearing only underwear. Their hands were covered in scratches, as if they had desperately tried to climb the tree to escape something. Beside them was the remains of a small fire. They had tried to survive. They had failed. A little further away, 3 more bodies were discovered. Their frozen forms suggested they had been trying to crawl back toward the tent, but never made it. And then the last 4. 2 months later, buried deeper in the snow, the remaining 4 hikers were found in a ravine. And what was discovered there is the reason this case is still called one of the creepiest true horror stories ever told. One had his skull shattered, as if crushed by an enormous force. Another had his ribs broken, his chest caved in, like the impact of a car crash. One woman was missing her eyes. Another was missing her tongue. And yet, there were no external wounds, no evidence of struggle, nothing that explained how these injuries could exist. The official forensic report called it the result of a strong, unknown, compelling force. And with that chilling phrase, the mystery began. Man detective, what really happened? For decades, people have tried to explain the Dyatlov Pass Incident. But every theory leaves more questions than answers. 1. The avalanche theory. The most popular explanation is an avalanche, that the snow collapsed onto their tent, forcing them to cut it open and flee. But the evidence doesn't match. The tent was still standing. The footprints were clear and calm, not frantic. And if an avalanche had occurred, the bodies and camp would have been completely buried. They weren't. 2. Military testing. Another theory points to the Soviet military. In 1959, the area was used for secret weapons experiments. Some believe the hikers accidentally witnessed something they shouldn't have. Indeed, traces of radiation were found on some of their clothing. Local witnesses also reported strange orange orbs in the sky that night. Could they have been missiles? Or something else entirely? 3. Infrasound, the sound of madness. A more scientific theory suggests the wind passing over the mountain created a rare phenomenon. Infrasound. Low-frequency sound waves below the range of human hearing, but deadly. Infrasound can cause panic, disorientation, and hallucinations. The hikers may have been driven insane by the sound, cutting open their tent in a blind panic and running into the snow. But even if this explains why they fled, it doesn't explain why some of their bodies were mutilated with such impossible injuries. 4. The paranormal and alien theory. And then, there are the stories that chill the blood. Locals claim to have seen glowing lights in the sky above the mountains that night. Some say it was a UFO. That the hikers came face to face with something extraterrestrial and were silenced forever. Others believe it was something even darker, an ancient curse of the mountain. After all, the Mansi tribe had long called it the Mountain of the Dead. And maybe that name wasn't just superstition. Drop of Blood, the last diary entry. But perhaps the most terrifying detail of all was found in the hiker's own diary. The last entry. It simply read, "Now we know snowmen exist." Was it a joke? Or had they really seen something out there in the snow? The question still echoes across time, unanswered. Creepy closure. The Dyatlov Pass Incident remains one of history's most disturbing unsolved mysteries. A group of young adventurers found dead in impossible circumstances. Crushed bones, missing eyes and tongues, tent slashed from the inside, and no clear explanation. The official Soviet report left the world with only 5 words. An unknown compelling force. And that phrase is what keeps people awake at night. Because if something so powerful exists, something that can make 9 experienced hikers flee into the freezing night, something that can kill without leaving a trace, then maybe it's still out there. So next time you find yourself in the wilderness, standing in the silence of the snow, listen closely. Because if you hear the wind whispering through the mountains, you might just hear their screams. Story number 2. The Hinterkaifeck Murders. Imagine this. You live on a lonely farm, far away from the city, surrounded only by endless fields and dark woods. One night, you hear footsteps in your attic. But when you search, there's no one there. Days later, your entire family is found slaughtered. Your animals are still fed. The fireplace still warm. And whoever killed you may have been living in your home, watching you, waiting. This isn't a ghost story. This is real. This is the horrifying mystery of the Hinterkaifeck Murders. House with garden, the family. The year was 1922. The place, a small, isolated farmstead in Bavaria, Germany. Its name was Hinterkaifeck. The family who lived there were Andreas Gruber, 63 years old, a strict and difficult man. His wife, Kazilia, 72. Their widowed daughter, Victoria, 35. Victoria's 2 children, Kazilia, just 7 years old, and Joseph, only 2. And their maid, Maria Baumgartner. It seemed like an ordinary rural family, but behind closed doors, there were whispers of dark secrets. And soon, their lives would end in the most chilling way imaginable. Footprints, strange signs before the murder. Days before the tragedy, Andreas Gruber noticed something disturbing. He found footprints in the snow, leading from the forest straight to the house, but none leading back. Inside, he heard footsteps in the attic. The family also reported missing keys, and even a strange newspaper left in the house that none of them owned. Someone was inside their home. And yet, Andreas told no one. He ignored the warnings. The family stayed. And then the horror came. kitchen knife the night of the massacre. On the night of March 31st, 1922, someone crept onto the farm. The killer lured the family members one by one into the barn, and with a heavy pickaxe butchered them. Andreas, his wife Kazilia, their daughter Victoria, little 7-year-old Kazilia, each killed with savage blows. The young girl's autopsy revealed something even worse. She was found with clumps of her own hair ripped out. She had been alive long enough to pull her hair out in terror. After the four were murdered, the killer walked calmly into the house. There, he killed baby Joseph in his crib, and the maid Maria, who had only been working there for a single day. 6 lives wiped out in one night. Is the strangest part. But the creepiest part of the Hinterkaifeck murders wasn't just the killings. It was what happened afterward. The neighbors grew suspicious when the family didn't show up in town. Days later, they went to check the farm. What they found was chilling. The bodies were stacked in the barn, covered with hay. The killer had stayed on the farm for days. He fed the animals, ate their food, used the fireplace, even milked the cows. The murderer lived in the house of the dead. Detective investigation theories. The case shocked all of Germany. But the more investigators looked, the stranger it became. Some suspected Victoria's late husband's family, but there was no evidence. Others thought Andreas had enemies. He was known to be harsh and cruel. One rumor suggested Joseph, the 2-year-old, was the result of an incestuous relationship between Andreas and Victoria, and maybe someone killed them to punish that sin. But the truth? No one was ever arrested. The weapon, the bloody pickaxe, was found hidden in the barn. Fingerprints, clues, suspects, nothing solved it. The killer simply vanished. Goes the legend. Over the years, the story of Hinterkaifeck became legend. Some say the family had been haunted, that the footsteps in the attic were not human, but something darker. Others say the killer still walked the fields long after. Even today, no one knows who did it. All that remains is the silence of the farm, and the knowledge that for days a murderer lived comfortably among the dead. Creepy ending. The Hinterkaifeck farm was eventually torn down. But the mystery remains. A family slaughtered. A killer who fed their animals and warmed himself by their fire. Footsteps in the attic. And a trail of footprints leading into the farm, but never out. So the next time you hear a creak in your attic, a sound that shouldn't be there, remember Hinterkaifeck. Because sometimes the footsteps you hear aren't just in your imagination. Story number 3. The Exorcism of Anneliese Michel. Picture this. You're a young girl studying at university, dreaming of a normal life. But one day, you begin to hear voices. Voices that curse you. Voices that tell you you are damned. Your body convulses. You scream in languages you never learned. You claw at your skin until it bleeds. And as priests surround you, chanting, trying to save your soul, you fall to the ground, whispering, "I am Lucifer." This isn't a horror movie. This happened. This is the terrifying true story of the exorcism of Anneliese Michel. The girl behind the horror. Anneliese Michel was born in 1952 in Germany. She was raised in a strict Catholic household. By all accounts, she was bright, kind, and deeply religious. But when she turned 16, things began to change. She started suffering seizures. Doctors diagnosed her with epilepsy. She was given medication, but the medicine didn't help. In fact, things got worse. The first signs. Soon, Anneliese began to see terrifying visions. She claimed to see demonic faces around her, whispering her name. She heard voices telling her she was damned and that she would rot in hell. Her behavior became disturbing. She would drop to her knees and pray hundreds of times a day. She refused to walk past Christian symbols. She said her body burned when she touched holy water. Her family grew terrified. Doctors insisted it was psychological. But Anneliese and her parents believed something else had taken hold of her. Smiling face with horns, the possession. As the years went by, her condition grew worse. She began growling like an animal. She ate insects, spiders, and even coal. She licked her own urine off the floor. At times, her voice changed. Multiple voices spoke through her, deep, growling, mocking. She claimed to be possessed by demons including Lucifer, Judas, Nero, Cain, and even Hitler. The priests who heard her said her knowledge of languages she never learned, Latin, Greek, was beyond explanation. Her body weakened, but her rage grew stronger. She would break rosaries, scream blasphemies, and attack those who tried to restrain her. The church finally agreed. This was no illness. This was possession. Church the exorcism. In 1975, two priests, Father Alt and Father Renz, began the ritual of exorcism. For 10 months, they performed 67 exorcism sessions, each lasting up to 4 hours. The recordings still exist, and they are some of the most terrifying audio tapes in existence. On those tapes, you can hear Anneliese growling in multiple voices, screaming in agony, laughing in ways that don't sound human. At times, she begged for death. At times, the voices cursed the priests, mocking God. Her family described how her body twisted unnaturally, her eyes rolling back, her face distorted with rage. Coffin the death of Anneliese. By the summer of 1976, Anneliese was emaciated. She refused food and water, saying the demons would not allow her to eat. Her knees were shattered from constant prayer. She had knelt hundreds of times until her bones broke. On July 1st, 1976, Anneliese Michel died. She was just 23 years old. Her official cause of death: malnutrition and dehydration. But to those who witnessed her torment, they believed it was something far worse. Detective the aftermath. The case went to court. The priests and her parents were charged with negligent homicide. The world was divided. Was Anneliese a victim of mental illness? Or was she truly possessed by something evil? The church declared her suffering was real. To this day, she is seen by some as a martyr. Her gravestone became a place of pilgrimage, where people still leave prayers and rosaries. Creepy ending. The Exorcism of Anneliese Michel remains one of the most chilling true horror stories ever told. Doctors say epilepsy. Skeptics say psychosis. But those who heard her screams, those who saw her eyes, swear they witnessed something far darker. And even now, the audio recordings still exist. A voice that shifts, growls, curses, and laughs in ways that are not human. So, was Anneliese Michel a victim of medicine's failure? Or proof that demons walk among us? Perhaps the truth is buried with her. But late at night, when the house is silent, if you hear a whisper calling your name, just pray it isn't hers. Story number 4. The Enfield Poltergeist. Imagine putting your children to bed, only to hear them screaming in the night. Furniture slides across the floor. Toys fly through the air. And your daughter begins to speak in a voice that is not her own. Not a ghost story. Not a movie. This really happened. This is the chilling case of the Enfield Poltergeist. House the family. It was 1977 in Enfield, North London. The Hodgson family lived in a modest council house. Peggy Hodgson, a single mother, was raising 4 children. Margaret, 12. Janet, 11. Johnny, 10. Billy, 7. Life was already tough, but nothing could prepare them for what was about to begin. Goes the first signs. It started with small things. Furniture moving on its own. Knocking sounds inside the walls. But soon, the activity escalated. The children's bed shook violently at night. Dressers slid across the floor. And one night, Janet Hodgson screamed as she was lifted out of her bed and thrown across the room. Peggy called the police, and when the officers arrived, even they witnessed a chair move across the floor by itself. The haunting was real. Studio microphone the voice. Soon, Janet became the center of the activity. She claimed to hear voices. And then, the voices spoke through her. Her voice would suddenly drop into a deep, guttural tone. On tape recordings, she growled, "This is my house." The voice identified itself as Bill Wilkins, a man who had supposedly died in the house years earlier. He described in detail how he had died in a chair in the living room. When researchers checked, the details matched exactly. Bill Wilkins had lived there, and he had died in that very spot. But skeptics argued, was Janet faking it? Some thought she was a clever child playing tricks. But recordings of her voice were so deep and unnatural, doctors said it was impossible for a child's vocal cords to produce it for so long without damage. Camera with flash witnesses. Over 30 people witnessed the Enfield haunting. Neighbors, journalists, paranormal investigators, even police. Photographs captured Janet seemingly levitating above her bed. Furniture flew across rooms. Toys and marbles hurled through the air at impossible speed. Investigators from the Society for Psychical Research spent months documenting the case. One of them, Maurice Gross, said, "This was no trick. I was there. I saw it with my own eyes." Fearful faced the terror. The Hodgson family lived in fear. At night, the knocks echoed through the house. Janet was often found in trances, speaking in strange voices. Sometimes she was discovered in other rooms, unable to remember how she got there. One night, she was found wedged inside a fireplace, as if something had tried to pull her in. Even skeptics admitted, whether or not it was supernatural, something truly terrifying was happening in that house. Detective theories. Skeptics claim Janet faked much of the activity for attention. Some photos of her, levitating, looked like she was simply jumping. Believers argued that while some incidents may have been exaggerated, much of the activity was impossible to fake. The tapes of the voice remain the most chilling evidence. Even today, they're considered unexplainable. Candle the end of the haunting. The activity eventually slowed down by 1979. The Hodgsons moved on with their lives, but Janet claimed the spirit never truly left her. In interviews years later, she said, "It stayed with me for years. Even now, I don't like to talk about it. It's not something you forget." Creepy ending. The Enfield Poltergeist remains one of the most famous and terrifying hauntings in history. Skeptics say it was a hoax. Believers say it was proof of life after death. But one fact remains. Children screamed. Furniture moved. And a little girl's voice transformed into something that wasn't human. So the next time you hear a knock in your walls at night, or see your chair move just slightly when no one's around, ask yourself, is it the wind? Or is it something whispering, "This is my house"? Story number 5. The Demon House of Gary, Indiana. Police refused to go inside. Doctors ran out of the hospital screaming. And children were said to crawl up walls like spiders. This isn't a horror movie. This happened. This is the true story of the Demon House of Gary, Indiana. Derelict House, the family. In 2011, LaToya Ammons moved into a small rental home in Gary, Indiana, with her mother, Rosa, and her 3 children. At first, it seemed like a normal house. But almost immediately, strange things began to happen. Black flies swarmed the porch, even in winter. Footsteps echoed in empty rooms. Doors creaked open and slammed shut. Then, things turned violent. Baby the children one night, LaToya's daughter was thrown across the room by an invisible force. Her sons would scream in terror, claiming they saw dark, shadowy figures stalking the house. And then the possession began. Her youngest son's eyes rolled back into his head. He growled in a deep, unnatural voice. He told his grandmother, "It's time to die." But the most horrifying moment happened in front of witnesses. At a hospital checkup, a nurse and several social workers watched as one of the boys walked backward up a wall and flipped over his grandmother. The room fell silent. The staff ran out screaming. Later, they swore under oath, "We saw it with our own eyes." Oncoming police car. The police. The case drew the attention of the police. Officers came to investigate. Inside, their radios malfunctioned. Cameras drained of battery. One officer swore he saw a shadowy figure pacing inside the living room. Photographs taken inside the house showed strange silhouettes and ghostly figures in the windows when no one else was inside. The chief of police himself admitted, "I am a believer after what I saw." Church. The exorcism. Latoya reached out to the Catholic Church. Father Michael Maginot was assigned to the case. When he entered the home, he reported feeling an overwhelming presence of evil. Objects shook. The walls seemed to vibrate. He declared the house was possessed, not by one demon, but by hundreds. For months, Father Maginot performed blessings, prayers, and exorcisms. He later described Latoya's convulsions, her growls, her unnatural strength. And he said the children seemed tormented by multiple entities. Eventually, after several exorcisms, the family fled the home. Derelict house. The aftermath. The story spread like wildfire. The house was called the Portal to Hell. Journalists, ghost hunters, and even Hollywood investigators came to Gary to see it for themselves. TV host Zach Bagans later bought the house. He reported terrifying activity while filming a documentary there, and eventually had the house demolished, claiming it was too dangerous to exist. Even today, police reports, medical records, and sworn witness statements confirm the events. Social workers, nurses, and officers who were there all said the same thing. Something evil lived in that house. Final creepy ending. The demon house remains one of the most documented and disturbing hauntings in American history. Flies in winter. Children possessed. A boy walking up a wall in front of doctors. You can deny the paranormal. You can call it hysteria. But when seasoned police officers refuse to enter a house, when nurses swear they saw the impossible, maybe it isn't just a story. So tonight, when you lock your doors and turn off the lights, remember Latoya's family. Because evil doesn't just live in haunted castles or abandoned asylums. Sometimes, it lives in an ordinary house, on an ordinary street, waiting for its next family.